Welcome to episode 123 of the Daniel Yoris podcast with today's guest, Jackson Lohr. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Joined here today by Jackson Lohr. Jackson, thanks for being here, man. I appreciate you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Finally got to get on this. You're one of the many awesome people I met at the Raise the Bar conference. And right. I think, something from that I've been thinking about a lot is like, I've said on the podcast before, I met so many amazing people, the best of the industry and all these big names and all that stuff was here. But I think there were a lot of people like you and I who were there who, yes, there were people who are, hundreds of thousands of followers and all that stuff. And that's right. One step. But then there's another bunch of us who are people like us who are, coaches who are actually still in the trenches, like coaching people in person. And not that the big names are not doing that either, but coaches who are still doing that. And it's like, we're just not the names, but like real coaches who are really doing stuff. And like, you're one of those people as well. So yeah. It's a pleasure to, have you on here and speak about all the things that we're going to speak about. Yeah.
I'm excited to get into it.
Do you want to go ahead and just give yourself a quick introduction, let people know, who you are and what it is that you do for those who might not know?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like Daniel said, my name is Jackson Lohr. I own and run Lohr Sports Performance, which is an online and in-person training business geared towards essentially soccer players, hockey players, as well as those with serious like hip limitation, hip movement limitations. So I have basically a number of young athletes and then a number of older folks who struggle with movement issues. So that's kind of where I focus. I do a little bit of work outside of that. I'm based out of Central Virginia, so just south of DC. And I've been doing this I'm coming up on my 4th year of the business. So training on my own. And I have a little bit of a background in sports medicine before that. So that's kind of where the sports and the movement limitation kind of came in is that's my medical background kind of feeding into that. So, right. Yeah.
And you played soccer in college as well, right?
Briefly, yes. Not at a high level, but just at a club level. Mm-hmm.
And did you have a lot of injuries, and was that sort of something that led you into all of this and dealing with the injury side of things? Is that that's more or less my story as well. And yeah, it's not an uncommon one.
Yeah, no, I think that's very common for people in the fitness industry, people in the sports medicine industry. So chiropractors, physical therapists, athletic trainers. That's really common for people to get into that. Mine was, I had an ankle injury and just chronic back pain. The ankle injury healed itself up. I think that was just like a directional thing for me. But the chronic back pain was like something I spent several years focusing on, after I had like kind of hung up the cleats, so to speak. Yeah. And that was what really led me down the path of exercise and using corrective exercise to heal. Right. So that was something that I dealt with a lot. Yeah.
Was the back pain something that you picked up? Was it like an injury that you picked up playing, or was it just something that was kind of always around, or just, the way you grew or something like that?
I think it was, so I was not very strong as a young athlete. I didn't actually start lifting. I lifted one summer in high school. And this is kind of funny as a personal trainer, I'm definitely one of the smaller guys in the room when we go to the conferences. So this is still in the back of my head. But I was skin and bones for most of my athletic career. And so I think that I still had powerful legs, and the imbalance of all that definitely caused some issues over time. It was never like one thing that this day it really triggered. No, it was like over years and years and years of my legs getting way stronger than the rest of my body. That definitely caused some of what my issues were. And just trying to outperform my musculature, basically.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. And again, it's a super common thing amongst great trainers where it's like, well, we weren't, very few awesome trainers were just the biggest, strongest, leanest kids growing up. Like that's different for actual pro athletes who just, they were that. And that's, the difference between athletes and coaches, I think at a high level. And a lot of it is like, well, we learn to overcome our shortcomings, right? So if you're not you're not the tallest player on the field, you're not the strongest player on the field, you still got to perform and you still got to get by. So you learn how to distribute your weight a little bit better. You learn how to actually train because you don't have to, or because you have to train more than the rest of the team because they're just bigger and stronger than you. And so while they can kind of get away with a few things, not training or training poorly, the smaller and less strong of us can't. So you gotta make that up somehow. And then the injury thing is a whole other avenue of that. It's like, okay, well, now I got to figure out how to get back on the field and and especially if it's something chronic, it's like, well, this can't just keep happening every 3 weeks. Like it's the worst thing ever. And that was my thing too. And so it's like, I got to figure out, how does the body work? How do I make it stop breaking? And how do I make it work better and like become resilient? And eventually, the playing career ends. Obviously an extremely small percentage of athletes become professional athletes, and so the rest of us have to do other jobs, and whether that be coaching or accounting or whatever your real job is. A lot of us find this avenue that way. What were some of the things then, and I don't want this to necessarily be like the bulk of the conversation because we have some stuff planned, but what were some of the things that you found that like really helped with your back pain and kind of getting out of that and getting under control? I'm sure it's like a long story, but what were some of the things that kind of really helped you?
One exercise and one stretch in particular, but this is really a framework of like kind of an approach to training, more than anything was, so the dead bug exercise, was something that I used a lot, to build my core, and kind of following I don't know if you've heard of PRI, the Postural Restoration Institute. They're, I don't agree with everything that they do. I think they take it a little too far. I think they don't give the human body credit for being as resilient as it is. So again, you take any one ideology way too far and it becomes less valid. I think that's with pretty much any ideology, but I use sort of their concepts of like, the muscle balance of the hamstrings and the core versus the hip flexors and the low back. I had really tight hip flexors, and I felt like I had tight hamstrings, and kind of used some of the glute bridges and dead bugs to build my core, build my strings, and glutes, and learned how to engage muscles in my stretches rather than just like doing static stretching. Learned how to engage muscles and do dynamic mobility work on my legs to eventually get to the place where I didn't have the same kind of like hip flexor tightness that I had before. So basically just use those concepts repetitively it was years, from pretty much from my sophomore year of college to senior year. I was still kind of slowly getting over that pain. And then another thing I did was I stopped running so much, because I had been I was a runner, I was a soccer player, just a lot of pounding on the joints, a lot of just continuously going forward, very quad dominant, very hip flexor dominant, and not balancing that with anything. And so just taking those concepts and applying them over a long period of time was key.
Super common that the soccer player workout is just like, well, I'm just going to go for a run because that like I run in soccer and like that's going to help me. It's like, well, this is easy for you and like you're really good at it. So it's like probably like now in hindsight, it's like all the extra running I did outside of like my regular practice. Like what a waste of time.
Right.
Like, it didn't help me get better at all. Like I was already good at it. It wasn't even hard. Like it was nothing. Now I wish I could run the way that I was running when I was playing soccer. It would kill me to do that. But, maybe one day, but, yeah, that the imbalance stuff and just like the learning how to like frame your or use your body efficiently is a really big one. And I think, again, the athlete example is super valid here because sports are not necessarily healthy. You get very specialized at doing one thing in a certain way. Like a tennis player is probably a really good example if you only use one arm, right? Like that one arm is going to be so much just different than the other arm that's not doing anything, and better or worse is up for debate, but you get really good at doing the sport, and the sport is not necessarily life. And so in soccer, you run backwards every now and then, but like it's always forwards. Basketball, same thing. Football, same thing. There's a lot of like forward motion, and that is good for the sport. It's not necessarily good for just general life, and so it can cause some issues. And learning how to reprogram your body, which I don't even think is that strong of a term, but like reprogram your movement or your motor patterns is quite a difficult thing, especially for a young athlete who's like, full of testosterone and ego, and like, I know how to do everything and I'm super strong. And like, what do you mean I can't even do this little dead bug exercise? Like, this looks so easy, and it is. I'm sure you've seen it and experienced it yourself. You get a 270-pound football player. It's like, okay, do a dead bug or a bird dog. And they're like, man, I deadlift 600 pounds for a warm up. Like, what do you mean do this thing? And like, they can't even do it. Right. Yeah. and it's super interesting, but it's like super helpful because you just got to relearn how to reprogram your body, which is very, very difficult and really brings that mental aspect into fitness. And we can go into like call it the mind muscle connection, call it whatever you want, but it brings a lot more focus to the table. Yeah, absolutely. I think another good point that you bring up there is the ideology of some of these things. I think a lot of it is like branding to a degree. It's like once you become known for a thing, it's very hard to sway from that thing from like a business perspective. It's very hard to be like, oh, I'm the keto guy. And then all of a sudden I'm just like, well, I kind of do actually like carbs. And it's like, well, then what are you? If you're not the keto guy anymore, you can't just like everything else. And so even if your true beliefs maybe change from that, for business sake, you kind of have to like lean into that same ideology. And I think you're also correct that this is taken across any field, not just fitness. I think it's very prominent in fitness and health, but it's very prominent across everything where it's like, well, if I just believe in this one thing, then I got to just go hard at this one thing and kind of ignore other thoughts, which is highly problematic in our society today, I think. Yeah, that is actually like one of the things that I use. So this is something that I try and teach my clients as well, is like my gauge for whether or not someone is selling something or educating. So the difference between the two is if they're just selling something and they're not educating, they are going to be all in a lot of absolutist talk about like, hey, this is the thing, this is it. Whereas like people who are educating, especially a lot of the best trainers out there, a lot of the best coaches out there, every answer to every question is like, well, it depends, right? It depends on, your situation, your anatomy, all yada, 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 versus if someone is just selling something, it's like, this is the answer. Yeah. So that's how I approach things. Yeah, I'm 100% with you. And I've also said the same thing. It's like the sign of a good coach is like when you ask them a question, the answer is mostly going to be, well, it depends. Right. And it depends on a whole bunch of things. And I think that, it's really easy to give a blanket answer and to say like, oh, this is always the best thing because it sounds really good. It sells really well. It sounds super confident. But the way that I, try and frame it is like, is this person saying something that has never been said before? If they say, let's just go with the keto example. Keto is the only way to lose weight, the only way to be healthy. And I think keto is good for some people and horrible for others. So, whatever. If they say keto is the only way to be healthy, that's not new. They're not the first person to come up with that. So if they were right, why wouldn't every single person be doing this? Right. And like that question, I think, just breaks down a lot of these absolutist statements because none of these ideas are so brand new to say like, wow, this person literally invented this concept. So if they were true, if they were correct in their statement, then everybody would just do that and we wouldn't have this problem. Like it would be a solved issue, but it's obviously not. So obviously it's incorrect, right? But that, this requires not a ton of critical thinking, and I'm not trying to be like, oh, I'm, so intelligent and so thoughtful and whatever, but if you just think about it just a little bit, like the argument really breaks down on itself pretty quickly, I think. Yep. Which brings us to, I think, something that we wanted to talk about today. So one thing that we did want to discuss today was go through a list of a lot of the excuses that people make for themselves and for their fitness. And listen, some excuses are certainly valid, right? Everyone's life is different. We don't all most people don't have unlimited money and unlimited time to spend on being the most jacked person around. Obviously, if that was you, I mean, you're not listening to this podcast and like you don't have these issues, and that's not a real person. So like real excuses do exist, but there's often a workaround, and there are a lot of like bullshit excuses as well. So I think the first one, we're going to start off like nice and easy because this is the one that kind of like set this off and set up this podcast, was the weather. People where I am in Canada, like it gets cold in the winter, and honestly it doesn't really snow that much. Like it's way blown out of proportion. It's not impossible to go outside in the winter. I don't live in a part of Canada that gets to like, minus 40 Celsius.
Right.
And so when the summer comes around, then it's like, oh, well, it's too hot and I can't go outside. I can't walk outside. And it's like, well, you got to pick one. Like
right.
what's it going to be? Either it's the weather's fault or it's your fault. And again, it just comes down to a little bit like, look in the mirror and say like, well, what is actually happening here? Is the weather preventing me? Is there a hurricane outside that is unsafe for me to go outside? Or do I just need to like put on a warmer jacket and, suck it up for a few minutes?
Yeah. Yeah. I think people, especially in that situation where it's people who are making excuses on both sides of things, right? Whether it's, okay, it's too hot, it's too cold. On the front end, it's like, okay, this person is either just completely not willing to be uncomfortable for their health, right? That is one thing. Or B, it's someone who is simply, they have not had that realization of how important their health is yet, right? And maybe I'm leaving out a third group of people who are simply just in denial of this is the thing that I need to do, and I know it, and most people do. Most people recognize like, okay, if I want to, there's enough information out there. It's not like there's misinformation saying, hey, if you exercise, you're going to be less healthy. Like people know that.
Yeah.
People know that you're going to be more healthy if you exercise. So I think, there is sort of that third category of people who are just in denial. But it's like, you at some point you have to pick what discomfort you're going to choose. Are you going to choose like a little bit of discomfort now in the present and go outside when it's a little hotter or a little colder, get the steps in that you need to be healthy? Or are you going to choose the discomfort of, okay, when I'm 60 and 70 and 80 plus, now I can't move like I want to. I can't, I'm not healthy. I can't keep up with my grandkids, whatever that may be. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And like very well said with that you have to choose the discomfort that you want, because it's going to happen. Like it's going to come either way.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes with like the sensationalism of words, we talk about like choose your suffering. And I don't think it has to be positioned as suffering. Like it's not, someone might consider that going to the gym is more suffering than sitting on the couch doing nothing. And like, I guess because it's like a little bit more difficult, but then like you said, it's a lot more difficult to not be able to move when you're older and have to take tons of pills and have to not be able to play with your grandkids and all this stuff. And so that's really hard as well. And it takes just a little bit of work up front to solve that. And I think with the weather thing, I think it's a thing that's like, it's out of your control.
Yeah.
So if you can't control it, like there's nothing you can do about it. So if you're going to blame the weather for your inability to do something, well then like you're screwed, because like you can't, what are you going to do? You can never control that. And I also think that the solution to the weather excuse is like, if you really feel that it's too cold, you can drive to the mall and walk laps around the mall to get your steps in.
Yeah.
If that's even, I don't like to drive in the snow. I don't have time, whatever. Walk laps around your house. Like I routinely will like go in the backyard, and if I'm just like on a phone call or like just texting on my phone or on Instagram or whatever, and I'll just like walk laps around the backyard if I don't want to go for a walk at that time. And like those steps still count, that activity still counts, that sunshine all still counts. So there's really no like real excuse as to how the weather should really impact your fitness. We don't live in a society where like we live outside, where it's like, oh, and sometimes like you might die by going outside. Like that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if there's like some crazy natural disaster, but that's not what we're talking about. It's few and far between.
Yeah.
So I think that weather one is a really lame one, honestly, but but it's very prevalent.
Yeah. So that's not one I've run into. I imagine probably being in Canada where the weather's a little bit more extreme, like that is probably something you run into more than I do. You know, where I'm in a pretty moderate climate, like summers aren't crazy hot, winters aren't crazy cold. And so that's probably something I run into regionally less.
Yeah.
But, you know, in your point to the walking around the mall, like one of the things I will even talk to my clients about when they're going on vacation is like, hey, look, if you go shopping, you're probably going to get a good amount of steps in. And like, that's something, you know, malls are something that have actually like contributed to a lot of, I'll call it nonchalant fitness is basically what it is people who not realizing that they're getting a lot of activity in. And then, you know, the other thing is like you talk about, you know, it being, you know, discomfort rather than suffering, right? My wife, one of the things she'll do just to catch up with people is she'll just go on walks with people. And I think it's a great way to catch up because you end up talking a lot. But oftentimes she'll have such a good time catching up with people that she's super sore the next day. She doesn't know it until after the fact. But she's like, man, like we walked like 3 miles on accident and didn't even realize it. We were booking it. It's like, I think that's one of the things I recommend most is like find someone you can talk with because it's going to make it seem almost like it's no effort at all. So
yeah, no, I love that one. Even for just like if you're going to go meet someone for coffee, like grab a coffee and then go for a walk, right? Instead of just sitting in the coffee shop, unless you're, you know, talking about some serious business meeting stuff, then like maybe that's different. But of course, again, there's always it depends. But I think that, you know, having that walk is good. And even if you're walking, if you don't have someone to meet up with that day, like call someone on the phone. It just makes the time go by faster, and you almost like forget that you're walking and time is just going by, and it's just like, oh yeah, like. The phone call's done, and it was 45 minutes long, and like, wow, I walked actually like really far. I should head back now and go home. So it's one of those things, and just, you know, for all the value that human connection brings to that as well. Another one, and something that you're actually kind of going through right now is injuries, right?
Oh yeah.
So minor or major injuries are and now this is one to be careful with. Of course, if you like can't move, obviously doesn't mean like, you know, go back squat as heavy as you can when you're crazy injured.
Yeah.
But if you have like minor nicks and injuries, like there are ways to train around and train through that. So can you talk about like what happened to you recently and like how you've been kind of dealing with that and getting around it?
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you bringing that up. So this is something obviously, like you said, I'm going through right now. About 2 months ago now, I was doing something in the kitchen and my knife slipped and I cut a nice little gash in my hand here. So you can see some of the scarring from the surgery. But I completely severed 3 tendons in my hand and a nerve. And so that is a long road to recovery. And up until a week ago, I was not allowed to lift anything with that hand. Pretty much because I couldn't grip anything. Now I have the ability to do 5 to 10 pounds in that hand, which is nice. So I've started to use that arm again. But this is something that Andrew Coates just put out a really solid resource, through, I think it was Kabuki Strength, on the effects of cross training and how much benefit you can get from using the opposite side of an injured limb or an injured body part. So I've been doing a lot of like single arm work where I've been trying to like do single arm clean and press, clean and jerk, and just experimenting with different things that I can do. And that's been a cool experience for me because not only am I experiencing like what my clients experience for when they're going through really difficult injuries, but also experiencing like, oh, I'm actually more capable with just this one side than I thought. And so that's been pretty cool. I think, I use another client story to kind of talk through why this is not a great excuse. One of my clients who's, you don't have favorites, but she's one of them. She came to me right after she retired. She's in her mid-60s and was born with basically no hip socket. So where her pelvic bones should have had like a socket for the head of the femur, there was none. And so she was born with her hips dislocated, and basically facing the wrong direction. So her doctor, by the time she had given birth, she was like 5 or 6 surgeries deep. If she were to fall, like her hips would dislocate. Very little movement in her feet, in her ankles, in her knees, in her back, in her hips, like all the way up, basically up until pretty much her neck is the only thing, like neck and shoulders are the only things that have like most of their movement. Right. And she came to me and she's like, look, I know what happens if I don't try and get some of this movement back and really strengthen myself, because I'm a fall risk already at 65, right? And B, if I don't use the movement I have to gain what strength I can. She was very aware of what it is to not be able to move and not be able to walk, but she puts in training 5 days a week. She does it. So we actually train hybrid. So I train her. I don't see her for 6 weeks at a time. I'll do everything online, and then she comes to me and we do a reevaluation, try and make one progression every 6-7 weeks or so. Yeah. And it's, so when it comes to like people who are injured, like there's always something you can do, right? There's always something you can do. And especially with injury, I think it's really good to at least have a coach to consult on, hey, maybe, you should stay within this range of movements, because that's what's going to benefit you the most. And that's where I always will push like, hey, hit mobility first and then build strength within that. So yeah, that's just my spiel on, oh, I'm too injured or I'm too hurt. I can't do it.
No, I love it. I think one of the things you hit on there is some of the benefits of having a coach through this is that when you're injured, it's easy for us to say, like, and I'm aware of the things that it's easy for us to say because it's our job, and the way that, it's not easy for other people to think of these things because it's not their job. It's really easy for us to say, oh, well, if your hand is injured, then just do other stuff. And they're like, well, what other stuff do I do?
Right.
Right. And so one of the things that a coach can do is like, okay, well, you can do these exercises, or do modify the exercise in this way, do the goblet squat this way, hold a kettlebell instead of a dumbbell, hold a this instead of a that, you set up the cable stack in this way, use this different attachment, all of these little nuanced things that just comes from being in the gym for so long and with so many different people and having to navigate different things.
Yeah.
And for most people who are not trainers, it's like, it is, to be fair, a challenging thing to figure out, like, well, how do I do this? But that's still not an excuse, because it's a figure-outable thing. You can either spend enough time in the gym looking at stuff, figuring out like, okay, well, I can't grab the D handle, but I can grab the rope if that's like a thing, or whatever it is, right? And figure it out, or ask a coach, or the gym attendant, or there's plenty of resources that exist in the world that are easily attainable, either paid or free or anywhere in between, that you can figure out, okay, well, I can't strength train the way that I normally train. Can I stretch and work on my mobility? Can I run and do cardio? Can I bike? Can I do this? Like, there's so many different things. And so it's really easy to feel sorry for yourself. And I'm definitely a person who, like, when I get injured, like I recently had like a minor back injury that was like, it was a minor thing. And like, but it was the first time I ever hurt my back. It scared the shit out of me. And I spent like the next day, like just kind of feeling sorry for myself. And I was like, trying to move it and keep it, whatever. But I spent the next like 12 hours, like pretty angry and pissed off at myself that it happened. But then after that, it's like, okay, this is not helping. Like it's okay to like be pissed off for a little bit at this thing, but then I need to move on and deal with this. Otherwise, this minor thing is going to become a really major thing very quickly if it's not dealt with.
Yeah.
And just the waste of time. It's like, just because you injure one thing, it doesn't mean your whole body is incapacitated. There's always something you can do, and it does take a little bit of creativity and some resources and some help. But it's something that can always be worked around. And I think that client is a great example. I mean, that's unfortunately like, one of the worst scenarios that I've heard of, right? Mm-hmm. And that's totally not her fault. It's not like, oh, she was doing something stupid and fell off a ladder. It's just the way that she was born. And so she has two choices: either just, be a big suck and be like, oh, well, woe is me, or do something about it and make the best of a non-ideal situation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely I love working with her because of that attitude. It's literally like, she's like, listen, this is the situation I have. This is the cards that life dealt me. I'm going to try and make the most of it. Right. And I think the more people that have that attitude, the better.
Yeah. I don't know if you struggle with this as well, but it's something that I've come across just coming up, and even still now. It's not like I'm old enough for older people than me to realize or to look at me and be like, oh yeah, you understand the struggles of a 40+-year-old, right? They're like, oh, you're 28. Like, what do you know? But in my, injury life experience, there's been plenty of times where I wasn't able to move. There was a 4-month period where I wasn't even able to walk at all. And so while I don't have the struggles of a 60-year-old, I've experienced briefly, in the grand scheme of things, but briefly, a period of not being able to move. And I never, ever want that to happen again to myself and to others. And so I don't know if that's something that you've kind of come across as well, where people who are, maybe 60+ look at you and like, oh, what do you know? You talk about all this fitness stuff, but what do you know about not being able to move when you're older? Just wait until you're my age, kind of thing.
Yeah. So I spent a year, the fitness and training has kind of been the side gig for me for a while. And more so it's becoming, the main thing I do. But one year I actually worked for a company that did, essentially employee health and wellness. And so I was the guy that went around in the factory and gave people exercises to, this is the sports medicine background coming in, gave people exercises to help with back pain, to help with foot pain, all that. And definitely while I was there, that's something I ran into, because it's a lot of older guys who, already have the knee arthritis. They're sedentary for the most part. So, they'll have a lot of back pain. If the guys aren't sedentary, they're probably, doing a lot with their hands. And so they end up with a lot of elbow pain, just overuse, tendonitis, that sort of thing. And yeah, so I definitely ran into that a lot there, but, I try and connect as an athlete who's gone through, we talked about my chronic pain at the beginning. That's something that I've been able to use to connect to people and just talk through. And I think, since having this surgery with my hand, the client I talked, had just spoken about, she and I have been able to connect further about that. Cause now I know what it's like to have something immobilized for a long time, and to this is not a fast recovery. This is a very prolonged, recovery. So just getting a few degrees of movement takes time. So yeah, definitely something I run into. I try and break it down, but the nice thing is that most people coming to us as coaches and trainers tend to already be past that. They're, they're at the point where they don't care. They want to feel better, and they want to move better. So.
Yeah. And I've always found too, it's they may say these things or have these thoughts very, very early, before they kind of hire you, and in that kind of consultation type phase, when they're not all in on the fitness thing, but they're their spouse or their friend or someone told them to go to the gym and they're not really sold on it yet. But then once they start to feel a little bit better, and it happens very quickly, then they're like, oh, okay. Yeah. This is what I needed. I wish I started earlier. Right.
Yeah. I think it's also a little bit of a fallacy to be like, oh, what do you know about how I'm feeling? You can be empathetic and intelligent about helping someone through a problem without having gone through it yourself. Right. Nobody can experience everything that life has to offer. God bless whoever may be that person. But, that is something. So for example, my wife, and this is a pretty funny example. My wife is a special ed teacher, and at one of the parent conferences, a parent came up to her and said, are you sure you're qualified for this? Did you go to were you in special ed as a student? yourself, and you're like, I don't know if that makes her more or less qualified to do this job. Like that's just seems like a fallacious line of reasoning.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, we don't require someone who's a neurosurgeon to have had neurosurgery done on them before. And probably that wouldn't work out too well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's probably a pretty like extreme or like backwards example where having gone through the thing would actually make you like somehow less qualified to do the thing.
Right.
But in our scenario, like I don't want to say it makes you more qualified, but it helps you understand the non-physical aspect of what someone's going through as an injury. Like anyone can learn, by studying and courses in school and stuff, like, okay, here are the steps to healing XYZ injury. And we all know the basic, biomechanics and physiology around that. And like, we can all, do that pretty well, but that's not the hard part, because we all know that it's how does that person actually feel? How is this impacting their life? What other things are being impacted? Not just, oh, they can't stand up. It's like, well, they can't do all these other things. They can't connect with their loved ones. They can't go out, and like they're missing all this social time and family time and all these things. And these are the things that really matter more when dealing with like rehabbing an injury, rather than like the nuts and bolts of it. The nuts and bolts of it are like pretty easy. They're just like kind of annoying and take a lot of time and hurt a little bit, but it's not all that difficult for the vast majority of injuries. Like your injury would be one of the more complex ones, but your standard, ankle sprain, shoulder issue is like, we've solved that one as like humanity. We know how to deal with that. It's just dealing with the human element of it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Another one, and maybe we'll get into a little bit of a bigger one, and maybe a more common one, is I don't have time.
Oh, yeah. I love it and I hate it, right? So, I think there's different camps of people who fall into this, but for most people, my question to them immediately when I hear this is like, okay, think about just to yourself a moment, like how much time do you spend scrolling on your phone or watching TV or watching movies in a given week? Just think about a week, right? A whole week, weekend included. Most people, and that's, people in their 60s and above as well. Like that's not just young people at this point. It's like most people are spending multiple hours a day in that category. So the I don't have time is the most BS answer I get. Now, the one group of people that I will say, okay, maybe you do have a good excuse here is parents of young children, especially before children can kind of self-supervise, right? So under 4 is kind of that category. If the what is it? There's the 2 under 2 and the 4 under 4 is like the terrible lineup for most people, right? And even to them, I would say like this is something that even if you think you don't have time, if it's just 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, you can carve out that time for yourself, and you can do it with kids. You can do it. My nephew he just turned 4 in February. And he comes over, with his mom, with my sister once a week, and they train with us, and he does his squats. He has his little 5-pound dumbbell, and he does his push-ups, and so it's like you can make it a priority enough so that you do have time. I think you might have a fraction of a percent of people that legitimately have that excuse. Yeah.
There's very few people that really, really don't have the time. The other thing that I would offer is how much time, if this is your thing where you're like, I really don't have time to work out, how much time do you think that you need? Because you may be wildly overestimating it. You don't need to be in the gym for 2 hours every single day, because that is a significant amount of time. That's 10 hours out of your week. And like not that many people have that much free time to dedicate to this. Now, if you're not trying to be an Olympia competitor or a strongman competitor or something like that, you don't need to be putting in that much time. So to and this again, it's a valid concern because you don't know what you don't know. So if you think that 2 hours in the gym every day is like the bare minimum, that's incorrect. And if you've only got 30 minutes to spare every other day, then that's good. Start there. Like whether that be a walk, whether that be some little home circuit if you don't have time to get to the gym, or it can literally be anything, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really important way to frame this, is it doesn't have to take up a crazy significant amount of your time. Even with like, the time spent scrolling on your phone and watching Netflix and stuff. Like I spend way too much time on my phone, and I mask it for myself as like, oh, like I'm a social media guy. So like I'm being productive by scrolling. And like, I know that that's like a fault of mine, but for some people who do spend a lot of time on their phone or Netflix or whatever, sometimes that is like your downtime. It's your winding downtime. You've had a crazy busy day at work, and the last thing you want to do is like, oh, I've just, been like full tilt all day and I want to get home and go to the gym. Like I get that you need some downtime. So it's not to say like, oh, all Netflix and scrolling is bad. It's not. But I think, again, just to reiterate what I said, is really consider how much time you need to dedicate to this and how much time you can dedicate to this. And it doesn't have to be a crazy, overwhelming amount of time. A little bit goes a really long way, and it doesn't have to be super intense, because your goals are not, again, to become, the most fit person ever in the world. So if you're just trying to be a little bit healthy, it really doesn't take all that much time.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I actually, when talking about like time, one of the things I actually have people do is like 10 toe touches first thing in the morning. Like get out of bed, whether it's get right before you get your coffee or, whatever your routine is just something that involves like a little bit of movement that's intentional first thing in the morning can get you in a mindset that helps you to want to move more. And then that's where you tend to see people maybe, put their phone away for a little bit longer in the morning or at night. And I don't know what it is. I'd love to see a little bit more science behind like what that exactly that is, but it's, it's kind of like the Newton's law, object in motion tends to stay in motion. I think that applies to humans, right? If we're sitting on the couch, we're going to want to continue to sit on the couch. And if we start our day with a little bit of movement, that's typically like, if people are just asking me like, hey, how do I get going? Like, that's the first thing I say is like, hey, do that for a week. Yeah. It's just every day, do that for a week and see if you don't end up moving more than just that. Yeah.
No, I love that. Totally agree. Another kind of quote or slogan, whatever you want to, motto, if you want to call it, that I've heard on this is just like consistency compounds. Yeah. Good behaviors breed other good behaviors, and starting in the morning is way easier than starting after work. If you're not on your fitness game, eating healthy at all, and your thing is like, all right, tomorrow after work, I'm going to start. Well, like, you've had plenty of opportunities to start after work, and like, your job beats you down, you had a bad meeting, whatever, something happened, and then that after work time comes, 5 o'clock rolls around, and you're like, I fucking absolutely do not want to go to the gym right now. Like, you haven't been in that mindset. But if you started in the morning, and it can be as small as what you said, 10 toe touches, like just start there. That's 100% more than what you're currently doing. If it is, then that might breed a better behavior. You might, when you go into the pantry to, choose your breakfast, you might make a slightly healthier choice. You might choose the, bran flakes instead of Nesquik, or like you might make that choice. And that's like just one small little step. And then this is how it kind of continues to compound. I was actually having this conversation with a friend the other day where it's like, and he was saying this to me, he's like, I can't figure out why when I'm working out consistently, I also just naturally eat healthier. He's like, it's so backwards to me. He's like, when I'm not working out, I should be eating healthier because that's when it matters more, because I'm not exercising as well. But he's like, when I stop going to the gym, I also just eat like an idiot, and I just eat so unhealthy and Uber Eats and everything, and it should be the opposite. And I'm like, yeah, it's super common. I don't know why, but I think, you're right. It's just like an object in motion wants to stay in motion, and it applies to human psychology as well. It would be awesome to know some more detailed, in-depth research on that, but I think that we've seen enough examples of it to know that it's true across the board.
Yeah. Yeah. I refer to it as the habit snowball. Like if you take a couple really small habits, they trickle into larger habits. And you can kind of take them one at a time. Kind of stolen from Dave Ramsey's debt snowball. If, Dave Ramsey has the debt snowball where you take your smallest piece of debt, you pay that off, and then whatever you're paying towards that, you just pay towards the next. That's why, I start people at toe touches, and then if they're like, hey, what do I do next? Then it's like, okay, drink more water, or replace some of your sugary drinks with water. Okay. And then, all right, what do I do next? All right, walk 5 minutes. All right. And, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it has to do with the way that we feel that we are worth treating. So I think it's almost like a self-worth thing of, okay, if I'm treating myself well, by going to the gym and being consistent that way, then I deserve to be treated well. And treated well, we really know means eating healthier, means getting the right amount of sleep, right? Those things. And so we tend to do that more in conjunction with going to the gym and doing the right things physically. And then versus if we're not treating ourselves well, then we're tempted to treat ourselves even worse because we don't feel deserving of that. And so that's something I've noticed with clients. And I think, going back to what you had said about people who get run down at work, right? One of the things that I will talk with clients about is like, hey, say they missed 2 workouts in a week. I've people who are doing like 3 to 5 workouts a week. It's like, hey, you missed the last couple workouts this week. What went wrong? Usually, almost without fail, it's life got busy or work was crazy. Almost without fail. And so my response to them is one of 2 things is like, okay, or it's, really both. It's like, okay, 1, no problem. Shake it off. Don't feel like you have to make that up. Just go and do better this week. Like, just pick it right back up. And then 2, what would it look like for you to do that before work, right? What would it look like for you to go in and get things done before work so that life has less time to affect your workout? So,
yeah. No, I think that's a great idea. Another thing that I will use frequently in those kind of situations is look at or think about how can you deal with this better the next time? If skipping the workout is the thing that happened because work got crazy, well, this is not the last time that work is going to be crazy and you're going to have, whatever. It's going to happen again, guaranteed. So what do we do next time? If, your workout is typically an hour, well, then I'll give my clients like a 20-minute, little home circuit, something or other that they can do. And I'm like, hey, this is not really like on path with your goals, and it's not going to necessarily get you stronger or like whatever, but it's at least something to keep the ball rolling.
Right.
So on those days when something comes up, I know that you can't get to the gym, and that's fine, but do this instead. It's at least still a workout. Your heart rate got up, you got a little sweaty, and I'm like number 1 against like, these workouts that are just like, oh, it's a strength training workout, and it's like using a 5-pound dumbbell at home. It's like it's strength training for a 90-year-old maybe, but those workouts have a lot of validity in these scenarios where it's like something is better than nothing, a little bit of movement, a little bit of keeping the habit rolling, and at least you don't feel like you quote unquote failed because it was still an option in the plan type of thing. So that's another strategy that I use in those exact scenarios. But I'm with you that oftentimes trying to get the workouts in before work, which sometimes means quite an early morning, but again, sacrifices have to be made here. It is a good strategy because the morning is typically more controllable than the evening or the afternoon for most people.
Yeah. I think that's especially true of people with kids.
Yeah.
Like, if you're up before your children are, which for some people is, very difficult. I see Jonathan Goodman posts about his kids and some of their troubles with sleep all the time. And I'm like, oh man, like I feel so bad for him. Cause he's trying to get through that next book, but it's like, yeah, it's just the reality, for some people, but yeah.
Another big one, and this is probably maybe one of the equal to the I don't have time thing is money. And this is a touchy subject for a lot of people. Obviously, inflation through the roof across the board lately. And like, these are not, we're not insensitive to that coaches have, we've been through it financially during COVID. So if you, like, I'm going to rant a little bit here, but like I've had some clients have been like, they work at former clients and whatever, they work at like the banks or like corporate jobs. And they're like, oh, and this was not recently, but within the past couple of years through COVID, when it was like literally illegal to be a trainer, they're like, oh, money's like been really tight. Like work is just like, crazy. And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess your job is, super hard. I'm sure your job is difficult, but like you haven't missed a paycheck. Like I haven't worked in 2 years. So, kind of know your audience here when you're talking to people. But anyways, the point of that is not for me to complain and seek pity. I don't need that at all. But it's like, we get it. We are sensitive to the fact that like fitness costs money. Fitness can be expensive. My big thing is one of two things. First, it doesn't have to be expensive. Second, everything is expensive. Mm-hmm. You want to do anything that you enjoy or that brings you value or positivity or anything into your life, it's expensive. So fitness is not more expensive than doing other stuff. Everything is expensive and you just got to choose what you want. If it's not worth it to you, then it's not worth it to you. But I think that your health should be something that is valuable to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that I always look at is, okay, right now, what percentage of your monthly paycheck are you actually putting towards your health, right? I'm not talking about health insurance. I'm not talking about, doctor's appointments. I'm talking about towards your health. Because for most people, health insurance, doctor's appointments are an after the fact thing. They're reactive to your health, not proactive. Mm-hmm. So, that's a question I lead with in response to this is like, oh, I don't have money. I don't have the money. Like, okay, of what you're doing, like what percentage? And if that percentage is not, 5% or more, then you're probably just delaying how much money you're going to have to pay in medical bills down the line. Like that is the case, for most people. And so, like I will look at, okay, what does a Planet Fitness or LA Fit, whatever big box gym, what does it cost for you to get in there? For a lot of people, it's like $20. If you get a Planet Fitness right before or right when it opens, it's $10. You can put $10 down, and then the next month you pay another $10. It's like, so for $120 in a year, I can have access to, as much fitness equipment as anyone. And the kicker there is with AI, the way it is now, anyone can go online and find a decent, even personalized fitness program to themselves that if you only have $10 a month, which just about, even I know homeless people who have gym memberships for that purpose.
Yep.
Right. And they're willing to pay a massive percentage of what they bring in because they recognize that their health is one of the last things that they have. So, and then looking at something more like, what you and I do with our coaching, it's like, I charge $100 a month for, my new clients right now doing a personalized program. And for most people, that's 5%. For the average person, in my area of the US, it's 5% of their take home pay.
Right.
For the average, right? It's so that's for the advanced
and
level.
in other areas of the US and areas of Canada, that would be like a lot less of a percentage of their monthly take home pay.
Right. Right. It would be 1% if I was in New York or California right now.
Right. Exactly.
So,
yeah, the money one is interesting because it comes to so many, like, you have kids, you have mortgage, you have whatever, house stuff. There's all tons of stuff to pay for. But I think that you're spot on with a lot of the things you said there. Like the AI thing is super interesting for like that personalization aspect on like a very low or no budget even. There's like plenty of free tools.
Yeah.
But we've always had, as long as we've been on the internet, like there's been, bodybuilding.com and plenty of free workouts that are available. And of course they're not personalized, but there are workouts that are available to you for free.
Yep.
And even if that wasn't the thing, if you go to Planet Fitness for $10 a month, $20 a month, like if you just go into the gym and you just pick 5 machines and just do them, that is like still better than nothing. Right. And so it doesn't have to be, super expensive. Even just going outside for a walk or for a run, like that is free. That costs nothing but your time and your effort, which is not, that's expensive as well in its own right. But the financial investment doesn't have to be a ton. I think the other thing, just to reiterate that you said, is this kind of like whole cost accounting, I believe would be the term, is like, if you don't spend money on it now, well, what's it going to cost you later on? Right. I saw this story, and I don't know if it's true. I think I saw it somewhere on Twitter. I don't know if it's true or not, but regardless, the principle is sound. There was a guy who was going to like a fancy gym in his area that cost $250 a month, I believe was the story. And his buddy was going to a gym, the cheaper option gym that was like $50 a month. And this guy that was going to the fancy gym was like going every day. He was working hard. He was like putting in effort, and he like, dropped a bunch of weight, got healthy, got in shape, all that stuff. And his friend was like making fun of him. Like, why do you spend $250 a month for this fancy gym? Like I spend $50 a month at, this other gym. But the guy that went to the cheap gym, like didn't go to the gym. He didn't use it. He wasn't improving his health. Like he would go sporadically and all this stuff. The moral of the story was like, the guy going to the more expensive gym was being made fun of for spending $250 a month at the gym. But what he said was, I can't believe my friend is willing to save $200 a month to be fat and unhealthy. And I was like, wow, that's a really good point there, that there is also a cost to not doing something. And this is probably the most true in our health. Like, yeah, it might cost you money to go to the gym, but the cost of not going to the gym, while it's not an obvious and easy to calculate a dollar amount, there is a heavy, heavy cost that will become a big dollar amount at some point if you don't take care of yourself. So it's kind of like maybe like a sad way to put it. And it's like, this is just the reality of the world that we live in. Our environment is not set up in such a way that it is easy and obvious to be healthy. So there has to be some personal investment, be that energy, time, money, or whatever, to invest in your health in order to stay healthy and just live your life and be able to do the things that you want to do. Because if you don't do those things, it's not going to be good news, and it's not going to take that long to get there. Yeah. It's very sad, but this is just the world that we live in, right? Yeah. So I mean, again, we're sensitive to the financial aspect, but there's plenty of resources that are not all that expensive. And again, it just comes down to a little bit of creativity, right? Walking, again, free. Running, free. You can do push-ups and whatever at the park for free. Like, none of these things cost any money, but you've got to put some effort in. If you think it's just going to be easy and it's just going to be served to you on a silver platter, even if you have all the money in the world and hire the best coaches and all the best equipment and all the best stuff, like, you still got to go and do it, and you still have to at least seek that out. So fitness is one of the, those few things that like money can't buy. It's maybe one of the only things I think that money can't really buy, because anything else you can just throw money at the problem and get it. And sure, having more money to spend on fitness will make it better or easier or whatever, but it doesn't actually solve the problem, because you can't just, even if you take steroids, surgeries, all these things, like, you still have to get in there and put in the work. You have to do the work. Exactly. Yeah. It's the only thing I can't think of another example. I've been trying to, can't think of another example where it's like, you have to just put in the work and money can't solve the problem if you had an endless supply. So I think that's the spiel on money. I think we kind of covered a good amount of that, and I think we've done a good job. I mean, obviously I'm biased saying that we've done a good job, but I think that we've done a good job of being fair and reasonable to this point as well, because, everything always depends, and there are some excuses that are valid and are legit, and people have, tougher times with certain struggles and excuses, quote unquote, than others, but there's always a workaround. Yeah. And if you're not sure, this is where coaches come in, and doesn't necessarily have to hire someone and spend hundreds or thousands of dollars a month. Like, reach out to one of us on Instagram or any number of the other good people. Like, we're more than happy to just give you a couple pointers, like in the DMs. Like, I'm not going to be like, hey, I don't have this equipment. Like, what should I use instead? And I'm going to send you like a credit card bill for answering the DM. Like, that's never going to happen. Like, people are going to just help you, and people are willing to help. So
yeah, I can't think of a single coach that I know that I've, talked with or worked with who wouldn't at least give some advice. I know coaches who, depending on who's asking, will give an entire like individualized program if it's the right person asking and they're genuinely asking. Like, it's just about, asking and being willing to be vulnerable that way. Briefly, I spent time as the fitness director at a small gym, and we had an issue where a kid tried to steal a dumbbell because he was being bullied at school. And I didn't know any of that until after we had brought him in and had the conversation. And it was like, oh, he was being bullied for being for being small and a little weak. And I'm like, okay, that's me 15 years ago, same kid just sitting in front of me. But if he would have just asked like, hey, can I come in, or can you write me a body weight workout that helps? Like, of course. I'm not, if I know that you can't pay, I know you don't have the money for it. Like, absolutely, I will do that for you, or I'll point you to something that's already been written well. There's all kinds, like you said, all kinds of free resources. There's plenty of things out there, and I will say, one more thing to add to that. I mentioned Planet Fitness, LA Fitness, some of those bigger box gyms. One of the other things, a lot of your local, I don't know if this is the case in Canada. This is the case, where I'm at. A lot of your local, like YMCA, young men, like they will have programs that you can apply to that they give scholarships to, that are like, basically, if you can't afford, you can get a membership for free. It's not the case with everybody, but that's an option. So
yeah, we have a lot of the same stuff here through the YMCA, or like the local like city run community centers and whatnot. They have tons of like either free or like basically free, very low cost programs, group things and workshops and stuff like this. And so again, like the resources exist, like they're there for you at low or no cost, but it still requires you to put in the work to seek them out, because they're not knocking on your door saying like, hey, are you looking for a free workout? Like no one's doing that. It's not happening. Right. Yeah. And I think, again, all of the good people in fitness, we want to help people. Mm-hmm. And if we didn't need money to live our own lives, because that's the way the world works, I would love to like do this for free. Yeah. And I say that very genuinely. I don't need fancy stuff and whatever, but I do need to like live. So I need to make money, and this is like my job, the same way everyone else does their job. Right. And charges money for it, whether you're a lawyer, accountant, doctor, what have you. So we're going to help. And there's tons of free stuff. Like fitness might be one of the few things where it's like just part of our business is giving away free stuff. Like everyone offers a complimentary, first session, first initial consultation, whatever. These have just become kind of like industry norms. Like imagine you went to a barber and he gave you a haircut, and the first one is just free just to see if you like it. Like that would never happen. It's like the same thing as like the first workout, but it's just like in that industry, it's just not the norm. And if you ask them, they'd be like, what do you mean? Like, of course you have to pay for this. I don't care if it's your first time or your 100th time. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny how much stuff is given away, specifically in this field. But I think that just shows kind of two things. Is one thing is like how little it's valued, is that you almost have to give away free, so, something free in order for people to like take the risk, so to speak, or take the leap to even try it. And then on the other hand, it's like, it also shows the heart of the people who are in the industry of like, like we wouldn't be giving stuff away for free if we didn't want to help. Yeah. So,
and I think all of us, we give away almost everything that we know for free, like through content, articles, podcasts, all these things. Like everything is given away for free. The paid aspect of all of this is just the individualization of it. And I've said this on the podcast like 100 times. Like when we're saying this, when we're having this conversation, we're speaking to, however many people are listening. We'll use the words you and stuff like this to make it sound like, we're having a conversation between, Jackson and I and you listening in the car or on your walk or whatever. But I can't possibly give you an individualized approach on the podcast because first of all, we're not having a live conversation and I'm speaking to more than just one person. But that's where the paid aspect comes. Like I don't have any other secrets about nutrition or whatever that I tell my paying clients that I don't say on Instagram.
Right.
It just becomes personalized when it's in a client situation.
Yep.
The one other thing that I wanted to mention about money, and then we'll kind of wrap things up here, is that there's also a very strong relationship between things that you value and will commit to when you pay for them. Yeah. It's very and I'm sure, again, going back to like the free offerings in fitness, like how many free programs have you given like your buddies or like people and stuff like that, and then they just like don't do it. But as soon as they pay you, even if it's like $10, $20 just to buy me lunch, whatever, something like that, then all of a sudden we just value it. And this is one of those other like weird, human psychology things where we really value things that we pay for and we don't value free stuff. So while there are tons of free resources out there, there is also an exponential value in the paid resources, and the dollar amount doesn't seem to actually matter. I mean, you might value something that you pay like 10 grand for versus something you pay like $10 for, but paying any amount seems to just get so much more buy-in and so much better results. So I wouldn't always look for the free option for that reason for most people.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. And I think, so I spent some time working at a fitness resort, which is a very unique situation, kind of like a Biggest Loser type place. Okay. And you would not believe the amount of buy-in from some people versus others just based on the amount of income that they have, right? Or the amount of expendable income that they have, right? So the people this was a place that it costs like $2,500 for a week, right? And they're going like, it's not cheap. It's a big chunk for most people, I will say. And the amount of commitment you have from people who are putting that kind of money down on their actions is massive. Yeah. And so you see people who are losing, in a week, mostly it's people who are looking for fat loss. You see people who are losing 10, 20 pounds in a week plus, right? So that is definitely an aspect.
Yeah, I think it probably does scale up. Like if that $2,500 a week is like 0.1% of someone's income, that might not matter that much to them. But if it's like half of their monthly income, then like they're gonna work their ass off in that thing because like this is not cheap to them. And so that maybe counters my point of like the amount of money. And like I think the percentage of your income definitely does play a role. Yeah. But that's a smaller impact, I think, than the fact that you're paying anything versus like a free resource, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Is there any last ones you want to fire off off the top of your head that's like really bugging you before we sign off here?
Yeah. So the one that gets to me is the don't know where to start. Like I don't know where to start. That's one that I think at this point with the amount of information that we have available at our fingertips that can easily be kind of double checked. That's just not, especially with AI involved these days, like that's just not an excuse anymore. Like if you don't know where to start, just go walk. Like, that getting outside and moving your body is healthy for you. So if you don't know where to start, that's, not really something I can abide. And I'm in the process of creating basically a PDF document that's going to help like for the people who I know that are kind of within my community for this specific thing. Basically it's kind of a be your own coach program, but that's coming later. I'll announce that on my own time, but that is the one that bugs me the most. Is like, if you don't know where to start, just start. Like you don't have to be perfect. So
yeah. I agree. It's probably the lamest excuse because, like you said, there is just so much information out there, and the other side of this, it can be hard to navigate that information.
True.
Which is also a problem. But if you just do anything is better than nothing. And so, like, if you're listening to this, I hope that you're not in that boat, because, like, even listening to this is already like a method of starting. Now you
Absolutely.
can get into the, analysis paralysis type of thing, but just go literally do anything. I'll walk, go to the gym, do a jumping jack, do 10 toe touches in the morning, like drink a water instead of a Coke. Just literally anything works, and then you'll get the ball rolling and you'll figure it out from there. And again, this takes some personal investment of your time and your energy and your mental energy. So not knowing how to start, there's not a lack of information out there. There's a lack of you seeking that information / applying that information. So I'm with you. That's kind of a lame excuse, but like it's a real one that we hear often, and it's like, just figure it out. That's the answer. I know that's kind of like a little bit harsh, but you don't know how to do it, figure it out. It's not rocket science.
Just start.
Yeah. Love it, man. Good stuff.
Cool.
Let people know where they can find you, contact info, all that stuff, so they can stay up to date when we know when that PDF will be released and whatnot, and to tune into everything else you've got going on.
Yeah. So, biggest places you can find me, website is lohrsports.com. So that's where you can find like all the different things that I do, especially if you're local to Virginia. Great place to find me there. Instagram is Lohr Sports Performance, and then YouTube. I've started to put a lot more content out on YouTube. So that's also Lohr Sports Performance. Lohr is Lohr. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. I'll throw all that in the show notes as usual, but Lohr Sports Performance across the board. And you've just recently started your own podcast as well. What's the name of the podcast? Yeah.
So the name of the podcast I've been doing is the Fitness for Life podcast. I was kind of surprised that one wasn't already taken. Actually very surprised, because for those of you who don't know, if you're starting a podcast, you kind of look through like, hey, what do all the other podcasts look like? I think technically one had gone 2 episodes and then stopped like 3 years ago. So I picked that name up. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing. And you can find that on YouTube and Spotify as well.
I don't remember the actual stat, but it's like some very high percentage of podcasts don't get past episode 3, and like 90+% don't even get past episode 7. So like once you hit past episode 7, you're just like auto in the top like 5 to 10% of podcasts of all time.
Yeah.
And you said it's available on all the places, right?
So Spotify and YouTube are the primary places right now. Working on getting everything else taken care of, but right now that's where you can find them.
When we finish this, we'll talk about Apple, because like Apple is its like own ridiculous beast, and like I am the biggest Apple hater like, probably ever. Maybe not ever, but like I'm up there. And like for podcasts, it's like the most annoying platform, yet it's also like the biggest platform where the most people listen to. But like from the podcaster end, it's like so annoying and like, just difficult to navigate. But we'll talk about that once we hit stop here.
Yeah.
Any last message you want to leave for the people here, Jackson?
No, I mean, I think the biggest thing is if you're finding that you're constantly running into excuses and making excuses, I would find someone to keep you accountable, because that is the biggest thing that's going to help you overcome excuses. They're gonna call you out on your BS. So having, whether that's a friend, a partner, a family member, whoever it is, somebody in your life who can help call those things out in you, is going to help you in all aspects of your life. So.
Beautiful. Love it. Thank you very much, Jackson, for being here, for sharing with us. We'll do the return leg shortly in the next couple of weeks or so. But yeah, Lohr Sports Performance everywhere. All the contacts will be in the show notes as per usual. Give me a follow as well on Instagram at Daniel Yoris, and make sure you like, share, subscribe the podcast, share it with your friends. It's always the best way to spread the message and all that stuff. Leave a rating and review on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you may listen to, because that really helps as well. I appreciate each and every one of you for listening. Go outside, be a good person. We'll see you soon.